Welcome everyone. This is we're going to talk about the teaching process tonight and Chapter 5 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. My name is Ron Ridenauer. We've got Rich Carlson, our Soaring Safety Foundation Chairman, with us tonight. Bert Compton, Soaring Safety Foundation Trustee and FADPE. Ken Sorensen's not with us tonight, I don't believe, because he's off at Perry in a glider contest. Bob Wonders here, Soaring Safety Foundation advisor. And question and answers are available during the webinar. I can't see the questions, but the other panels can, and we'll either answer your questions online or we'll pose them to the panel during a break in the training. So you can submit your questions online, and then we'll try to get to them and answer them during the course of the evening. Just a quick review of some of the resources that can be found on the Soaring Safety Foundation website. Flight instructor refresher courses. Rich Carlson and Glenn Collins are primary movers on that. They have other presenters as well. Tom Johnson and others work on that as well. Safety seminars. Tom Johnson, one of our Soaring Safety Foundation trustees. Site surveys, the same. Bert Compton is one of our Soaring Safety Foundation trustees. Outdoor-based flight scenarios. Scott Manley has worked really hard on that. Practical test maneuver videos. Bert Compton produced a number of them a few years back. The flight training programs that we have online there, amongst others, we have the bronze badge test, knowledge test, the wing runner course, and the tow pilot courses. We have flight safety programs, including SSA convention safety presentations and CFI-G training webinars. Also, the slideshows from the FERC's flight instructor refresher courses are there as well. So, topics to be discussed this evening: what is teaching? Instructor's code of ethics, preparation of a lesson, presentation of a lesson, organization of your materials, training delivery methods, problem-based learning, electronic e-learning, cooperative or group learning methods, demonstration performance method, drill and practice method, the application of the lesson, the assessment of the lesson, kind of the review of a lesson, instructional aids and training technologies, test preparation material, future developments, and the chapter summary. So we got a lot to talk about tonight. We'll start off right at the beginning there. What is teaching? Well, it's a process. It's the ability of the teacher to communicate knowledge and skills to the learners. And so this comes right out of the Airman's or Aviation Instructor's Handbook, page 5-1. So some of the essential teaching skills of instructors: you have to have good people skills. And I put in there the importance of listening. I know that Bob Wander has emphasized that in past seminars or webinars that we've held, and we'll just emphasize it, that it's a really important skill. If you have to be able to listen to your learner so that you can better equipped to answer their questions and understand their questions and be responsive to their needs as well. So it's really an important skill to have, amongst other skills, but listening is really an important skill. You have to be a subject matter expert, an SME as we call that, because you are now the expert. You're not just the guy on the field anymore, that or guy or gal on the field that maybe has flown a lot, maybe is an experienced cross-country flyer or something like that. When you become an instructor, you are now the expert, and people will look to you to answer their questions and expect you to be able to do that. And so it requires constant study, constant review on your part to continue to be that expert. And I know that I'm sure all of us instructors at one time or another we've been kind of caught off guard. I was caught off guard just a couple of weeks ago by a question that I really hadn't considered in a while, and so it took me some time to do some research and try to understand the question and understand how to best to answer it. So, but you have to know what your resources are, and that's all part of being the expert as well. So, management skills. You have to be able to manage the teaching, plan, organize, lead, supervise, and manage your time as well. Time management is really crucial. I mean, especially if you're flight instructing and there's no lift in the area. I mean, you're in the air for a very finite amount of time, and you must utilize that time to the best of your ability to teach and make sure that your learners are simulating the information that you want to teach. So, and then assessment skills. You have to have reasonably good assessment skills, and that becomes before the training begins. You have to assess where your learner's at. Hopefully your school has some kind of mechanism, a card system or something that you can review the learner before they show up, especially if it's somebody you haven't flown with recently. So before training, you have to assess where your starting point is. During training is a constant assessment of how the training is going and where your learner is at with that training. And then, of course, after training, having an assessment as well so that you can move forward and evaluate what the training that was accomplished, and maybe what training wasn't accomplished to the maximum extent, and so now you have a methodology to go forward with about what the future training will be looking like. Instructor's Code of Ethics. Now, this is found on page 5-3, and I basically copied it, and so I'm going to just briefly go down through it. You can go down through it on your own and look at it. But, instructors have to have some ethics. I mean, we are the people that your students, your learners look up to. And so you have to have a code of ethics. Making safety the number one priority is really important. And that doesn't mean that when you don't think anybody's looking, you can do that high speed pass on the runway just because you think it's fun. I mean, that's not, at the Soaring Safety Foundation, we've worked hard to try to emphasize how those kinds of things can lead to unsafe practices, and even that act in and of itself is unsafe in that you're not. It's not possible for you to calculate every nuance of what's going on, whether there's another airplane coming in from someplace or a glider is coming in and now you're forced to make a low energy landing or something like that. So it's, those kinds of things we have to really work hard at not promoting poor judgment. Develop and exercise good judgment in making all your decisions. Recognize and manage risk effectively. We have many risk management tools in our toolbox these days. Not necessarily so back when I learned how. It's much more prevalent to have these risk management tools to utilize to determine the amount of risk that a flight, whether it's cross country or local or whatever, and you need to be able to teach that so that your learners can then manage their risk when they're out on their own. post solo or post getting their certificate. They'll be on their own. And if you don't recognize and use those risk management tools, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, I believe. You're not emphasizing that enough. Well, then they're not going to emphasize it either. So it's really important. Be accountable for your actions. Be accountable for your actions. Act with responsibility and courtesy. We want people to learn. We want people uh, to be alert to how we behave, and if they are, well, then hopefully that'll pass on in their behavior as well. Adhere to prudent operational practices and personal operating parameters. If you set some personal operating limits, well, you need to really adhere to them, because that's the way that you're going to be able to teach your learners to do that as well. Adhere to applicable laws and regulations. Just yesterday I was giving a flight instructor check ride, and I one of the things that the instructor candidate mentioned or talked to me was that he uses the I am safe checklist when he talks about the P and the pilot and PAVE. And I said, so is that a requirement, or is that just something that's nice to do? And he did not know that it's actually required, that you, in the federal regulation 6153, is a requirement whether you have a medical certificate or not. So obviously in the sailplanes, most of us, well, I wouldn't say most of us, but a number of us don't have medicals. And some of us might if we're also airplane pilots. But he was unaware of, he's a commercial airplane pilot, went through many little different tests, and somehow he missed that in his training. And so it's, little things like that go through the cracks, seep through the cracks. And so unless you are aware of that, 6153 requires that, you can use the I am safe checklist as a tool to determine your physical state before you go fly, but it's actually required that you make a determination that you're okay to go fly. Seek proficiency to control of the aircraft. So, we don't want to train just to minimum standards. We want to try to actually train to higher standards than the minimum. I mean, the minimum are set there that the applicant or the learner has to demonstrate before he takes his check ride to you, the instructor, and during him taking the check ride, he has to also demonstrate that proficiency during the check ride. So, there's two different things, as we've always talked about. There's currency and there's proficiency. And so, currency is one thing; it's the bare minimum. But proficiency is a step above that, and we should always seek better proficiency, because ultimately that will lead to less errors. Use of flight deck technology in safe and appropriate way. We've got handheld GPS moving maps these days. We've got GPS moving maps installed in the panels these days, and we have FLARM in many sailplanes these days. And you have to teach how to use those technologies safely, and it's not to be staring at them. And we still have to maintain outside vigilance, especially if we're in a congested area like thermaling in a gaggle or something like that. So it's really important that you not use the technology as a tool to enhance your awareness, your situational awareness. Be confident in a wide variety of flight situations. If you're not confident, if the wind is picked up that day or something like that, and you're really not confident, it's going to show to your learner that lack of confidence. So you need to maintain your proficiency so that you are confident in a wide variety, just as it says there, of flight situations. and be respectful of the privilege of flight. You know, it's a privilege that we go fly, that we're able to fly as much as we are here in the United States. So be respectful of that. Any comments from our panel so far?
No questions have shown up, but there is a glider-specific code of conduct that is linked off our website, along with the general aviation model code of conduct.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Rich. And I should have included that. I know about that, and I should have included that. But you're right. There's a code of conduct only for glider pilots as well as glider instructors. And as Rich says, that's on the Soaring Safety Foundation website, where you can link off of that to a separate site. So we'll talk about our course of training next, and page 5-4. Course of training is a complete series of studies leading to the attainment of a specific goal. So in this case, you know, the goal that we have is a pilot certificate. You know, initially the goal is a student pilot certificate, maybe, but eventually we want to be a certificated pilot, either private or commercial, certificated sailplane pilot, glider pilot. So the curriculum is a complete set of is a series of courses leading to a pilot certificate or rating. The syllabus is a step-by-step building block progression series of lessons, including objectives and completion standards. So you should have a series of lesson plans that's going to take a person from step by step as they move along. And I know that there's a few of them out there. I know Bob Wander has one out there. I know that Tom Knopf has one out there that's still available. And they basically take a person step by step, and they include what you're required to study. They include what you're required to accomplish. You know, in general, the standards by which you're going to be measured is probably, you know, if you're going for a certificate, will be the PTS. But the standards for soloing are also, they're a little bit not as obvious as a PTS, but they're in the glider flying handbook, and they're listed under the common errors. And so certainly those would be the standard for a student pilot, is to not have those common errors happening all the time, and they should be at a minimum before they would solo. And a lesson plan is a detailed plan for how a specific lesson will be conducted. I mean, if you know, a typical lesson plan that I used to use when I was instructing full time would include what we did in the pre-flight, whether it's just the pre-flight walk around, or we talk more about the glider assembly or something like that, followed by getting in the glider and running a cockpit checklist before takeoff, including a briefing of what was going to happen, the flight on tow, whether it's just simply the tow or maybe working around the prop wash or slack line. In free flight, then we'd have one or two maneuvers that we would want to practice. You know, maybe while we were up high, we could practice stall recognition and recovery in different aspects, different configurations of the sailplane. And then steep turns are another maneuver that we could work on. Slow flight at minimum controllable airspeeds is another maneuver. And then, of course, getting back, you know, having the judgment and the decision-making skills to get back into the pattern at the proper time and altitude, and flying an approach and a landing, whatever type of landing that might be. So that would be kind of my lesson plan for a given lesson, is a combination of those maneuvers, and we talk about each one of those things beforehand. You know, if we had a crosswind, we talk about how that affects the approach and how that affects the landing itself. So the preparation of a lesson has training objectives and standards. So for pre-solo standards, as I mentioned before, I use the glider flying handbook, areas of common errors that that happen. Such as in a steep turn, one of the common errors would be overbanking. So you want to make sure that your applicant, your learner, is not overbanking. Or another common error would be not correcting for the adverse yaw, things like that. So pre-solo standards would be the fact that they're not making those common errors. Pre-practical tests, you're going to use the PTS in the terms of gliders. Sometime in the future, we'll probably have ACS for the gliders as well. So those are your objectives and standards. The performance-based objectives, description of the skill or behavior, the skill or behavior, the conditions under which you're going to or base the performance on, and then the conditions that you're going to have when you fly the flight, and then the criteria. So performance-based objectives have very specific objectives, and they're outlined either in the glider flying handbook in our case, or the PTS for the practical test that a person is training for. And that just further emphasizes the importance of the PTS or ACS in the aviation training curricula. We don't want to teach the test only. So obviously the test is there as a sampling of what we expect the learner to be able to perform under those conditions, those specific conditions of the practical test. And so, but your training, the instructor, have to train in a much more wide or broad sense. Where we might only, Bert or I might only test straight ahead or turning stalls, or maybe accelerated stalls. You're going to need to test other types of things like secondary stalls. We don't, if we see a secondary stall, Bert or I, on an exam, it's because the applicant has mishandled the controls, and so you should have already trained them in that area, even though it probably will not be tested on the practical test. So it's much more comprehensive training that you have to give the applicant than we will probably end up. We can't test everything. We'll probably observe most of the things. We have to observe the things that are in the PTS, but that's not everything that should be trained when you're training your student or your learners. And then we got decision-based objectives, and those are more like decision-making, ADM, risk management skills, single pilot resource management. We're when Bert or I or an examiner, DPE, conducts an exam, conducts a practical test, we're looking for how people think, and we provide scenarios, and this is what you should do as well as an instructor, is provide scenarios to see how people think. If you say, well, you've gotten down to 1,000 feet and you've picked a field that's only 500 feet long, how are you going to approach that field and get into it safely and see what the applicant thinks? It's many times I kind of leave the question a little more open-ended during the practical test, and I say, well, how large or small a field are you going to be looking for if you had to make an off-airport landing? And I'll tell you, the majority of people, and they will say something like to the tune of 500 feet. But in my mind, it greatly depends upon the area of the country that you have to work with. Okay, in the area that I'm in, we have big farm fields that, the smallest one is a half-mile long. And I know that doesn't exist all over the country. And so you have to tailor your training to the area of the country that you're training in. But 500 feet isn't really very large. And I say that because, what happens if you happen to misread the wind by 180 degrees and you end up landing downwind instead of landing into the wind? You're going to use up a lot more than 500 feet. Or let's say that at the last, as you're turning on from base leg on the final, you notice that there's a set of wires that you didn't notice before. And so now you're going to have to come in a little higher into that field and try to still get into it safely. So I always recommend, a large field, as large as the area where you're flying will permit. And I would say no smaller, to be quite honest, than 1,000 feet would be the smallest field that you would really want to consider because of all the extra things that might be around and that you haven't really thought about or seen before you get right down on the landing area. And then other uses of training objectives, provides the learner with a better understanding of the overall learning objective, which is safety in flying. We're trying to train pilots to be safe pilots. And we do that by not only making sure that they're proficient at the maneuvers that they need to be proficient in, but they have a good understanding of the aeronautical decision-making tools that are at their disposal, the risk management tools that are at their disposal, and how to be a single pilot resource manager as well. So when I learned this years ago, we had the 4 steps of the teaching process, and they were preparation of the lesson, presentation of a lesson, application of the lesson, and review and evaluation. Now, the words have changed slightly, but the basic concepts are still the same. So we've talked about the preparation, how important it is to prepare. The presentation of the lesson is equally important. So we'll talk a little bit about before the lesson, before you deliver the lesson. Write an outline, have some kind of outline that uses the building block technique and set a positive tone. I've kind of just taken a few excerpts out of the book. There's other things that you want to think about before the lesson. But these are, in my opinion, are really a part of the some of the important things. When I say write an outline, if you're flying, if this is a flying lesson for the day, well, write an outline of what you want to be able, what you want to accomplish in the air, so that you have some reminders, and take a pen or something with you so that you can make some notes about how well the learner did on those things that you had talked about on the ground and we're going to review and build on in the air. So, and set a positive tone for the lesson. Make sure that the learner is ready to receive the lesson. If they're tired or fatigued, the chances are they're not going to be as receptive to the lesson. And you may be better off just to not go fly that day. If you observe that your learner is fatigued or distracted in some other way, mentally or physically, you might be better off to just stay on the ground that day and talk about exactly what's going on with them, because chances are the lesson won't be as effective as it might be if they have a positive attitude. During the lesson, make your learning goals explicit, okay? And be careful to listen carefully to the learner's questions. So make sure that you have talked about the goals that you've set, Is the goal today to be able to do an accuracy landing? Well, make sure that that's a known goal. And so discuss beforehand about how the wind might affect that goal of making an accuracy landing, or how other traffic, if it's a busy Saturday and there's a lot of other glider traffic in the area, how that might affect their ability to make an accuracy landing to a predetermined point. And are they willing to change that when they finally realize that maybe that's not the best thing to do today, and vocalize that on the pattern. Hey, you know what, Mr. Instructor, today that point that we picked for the accuracy landing isn't going to work. There's a sailplane already sitting in the way, and it would be hazardous for me to try to make that accuracy landing to the predetermined point. So, that displays good judgment, good risk management on your learner's part. And that's an equally valuable lesson for you to observe. So don't make sure that it's flexible. Make sure the lesson does have some flex in it. So, and then after the lesson, you want to summarize the main points, assign some homework for the learners to continue with their learning, and then critique the lesson. Talk about what went well and what areas need some improvement. So the organization of lessons include a lesson introduction. You want to try to get their attention and make sure that, I know that whenever I teach spins, first words that I talk about spins is that a spin is a controlled maneuver. And, most of the time that gets the person's attention. What do you mean that's a controlled maneuver? That's, spin, that's totally out of control. It's the aircraft spinning. Well, my point is that unless you follow a prescribed set of procedures to get the glider to spin, it won't. It might steep spiral instead, but it won't spin. And so spin is actually a very controlled maneuver, and the recovery is a controlled part of the whole maneuver as well. So try to get their attention about, again, not talking about spins now, but even stalls. Many people are apprehensive about that. So again, you can introduce it how controlled the stall maneuver is, and that we're going to teach the recognition of the approach of a stall, and so that your learner is better equipped to recognize when they can actually avoid the stall, the full stall, by putting the controls in the correct position, reducing the angle of attack, and not even creating the stall in the first place. So, there's many ways to teach maneuvers, and so to try to get their attention right off the bat and talk about how controlled these maneuvers are. I think when they think, well, when they walk in, they might think, well, that's an uncontrollable pitch attitude for the glider. So talk about motivation and talk about an overview of what you're going to try to teach that day. And then development, there's different ways you can develop it. You can use past experience and talk about how those past experiences can relate to the present experience. You can go from simple to complex. I mean, you talk about the walk-around inspection, the pre-flight walk-around inspection, and then more complex would be to talk about how to assemble a sailplane correctly and with efficiency and completeness. So that would be a more complex thing to talk about than just a simple walk-around inspection. you go from the known to the unknown. You know, if you're doing you've been doing stalls and stall recoveries, and now the unknown is the spin. Well, then that's you can talk about how the aircraft has to stall first before you can even it can even think about getting in a spin. And like in the our ASK-21s, and I think those of you who fly ASK-21s know the CG has to be right near the aft limit. And so if you're going to spin the ASK-21, our glider club has spin weights, and we do a weight and balance calculation. Again, that's another thing that they should know, but an unknown about how to load the glider correctly to be in the aft uh, CG location so that the aircraft will spin. So most frequently used to least frequently used. You know, dive brakes are most frequently used during the approach and landing, but they may not be available to you that day. You know, and one of the maneuvers that we do on the practical test, and one of the maneuvers that you, the flight instructors, have to train, is the no spoiler approach and landing. And again, I think I've talked briefly about this before, and I get questions, and I'm sure Bert does too, and other examiners throughout the country get questions about, well, how am I supposed to teach that maneuver? And again, you have to utilize your references and things that you have to utilize. And again, the Soaring Safety Foundation is an excellent resource in that case because Bert did a slip to landing video, and that's exactly the way he demonstrates that in the video is what I expect, and I'm sure that's what he expects, and that's what most examiners that I know of would expect the applicant, the learner, to be able to do, and that's what you should train to. That's the level of training. A lot of people say, well, what about those slippery fiberglass gliders? Well, Bert showed you in that video that the ASK-21 is can be do a slip to landing very easily and very comfortably. So watch that video and learn so that you can learn and teach your learners like that. And then you want a conclusion, a review of the important elements and how they relate to the objective of the lesson. So then we have different training methods. And so we have the lecture method. You know, the lecture method is well suited for large groups, I think. Many times like this, we've got 100 people out there or so. And so the lecturing method works pretty well. We don't really have the capability of using a discussion method very well. I mean, you can write in questions to the panel, and then when we take a break, we can talk about the questions that have been written in and that you have. But it's not as much of a give and take as if you had a smaller group or a one-on-one situation. So, and when you're preparing to teach a lecture method, you have to review the material. You have to be prepared. And PowerPoint seems to be the preferred methodology in lecture methods, but it's not the only way. You can use a whiteboard or and write on the whiteboard. You can list out the things that you're trying to convey to them on the whiteboard. You can, if it's a small enough group, you can have them tell you what you should put on the whiteboard and kind of decide what the important items in the lesson are. So you got to use suitable language, and that doesn't necessarily talk to foul language. I'm talking more about use aviation terminology, and the terminology that you would expect your learners to see and read in the manuals that you're going to recommend that they read, and not use slang. Suitable slangs I find new instructors particularly, and it's probably because of who taught them. I don't have any other reason to believe it they just come up with it on their own. But slang terms are frequent, and especially with new instructors, and you have to be very careful not to use slang terms. In my opinion, I think that it's important to use language that we don't push the nose up and down, push or pull the nose up and down. You push and pull on the yoke or the stick, right? But that's not pushing the nose up or down. The nose of the glider pitches. The wings of the glider roll and about the longitudinal axis. And once the roll gets to the point where the bank is where you want it, you stabilize the bank there, and then the glider will turn. So, try to use the terminology that explains, just like it explains in the book, in the manuals that you'll be using the same way, so that the learner is not confused by the slang terminology that you may be using. And we have types of delivery. We'll talk more about those as we go on, and the advantages and disadvantages of the lesson. So the lecture. Well, the major advantages that you can do it in a group setting. Okay, the lecture method can be fairly effective in a group setting. I remember when I was in college, the freshman college engineering classes, the lectures were like 250 people. Now that's you don't really get a chance, though. The disadvantage of that is it's pretty tough to interact with the lecturer or the professor on a one-on-one basis. You have to go to his or her office, and unless you wrote the questions down that you had, it's very difficult to interact in a lecture type method. So the smaller groups work okay, like the FERCs we have. We use a lecture method in those, but we actually to some extent, we use a guided discussion rather than a strict lecture method. So, discussion method offers an exchange of ideas that the lecture method doesn't allow. And in the discussion method, it's important that your learner participates. That's an important part of the discussion method, so that you can get a feel for what they do or they don't know. And so otherwise, if you're just giving lectures, just presenting a lecture, it's pretty tough for the lecturer to understand, the teacher to understand what the learners do or don't know. I really like the guided discussion method, and I think that you can come into the lesson with a couple of questions, and then you can kind of guide the discussion in the ways that you want the questioning and want the lesson to go. So it's important that you try not to get too broad a question out there, because you'll get off on tangents that you could get off into tangents that you don't really want to be in, and it just prolongs the discussion and may offer some confusion as well. So try to plan it out so that you keep the discussion in the lane, so to speak, so that your learners are focused on what you're trying to convey. The learner preparation for the guided discussion is important too. They need to read the books. They need to read the resources and the manual, so that they're prepared to discuss the subject matter with you. Whether it's, let's say, just take a typical example of weight and balance. I mean, if you have to spoon feed, as we sometimes refer to it as, and you're always having to continually teach them every little aspect of the weight and balance, whether it's the terminology that you're using, what is a moment arm, what is What is the datum point? If you're having to constantly talk to them and instruct them in those areas, it kind of points to the fact that they probably haven't prepared themselves very well to be in that discussion. So, and a good technique in a guided discussion is you let the student talk, okay? And this is a good debriefing tool. I think Bert and or Bob or possibly both talked about this in earlier in our sessions. They talked about the fact that they and myself included, we get a lot of insight as instructors as to if you let your students talk and get them to evaluate their performance. And it's amazing how much information you can glean from that. And then it allows you to pick little things that need to be maybe discussed further or things that might be slightly misunderstood. It allows you to get a better understanding and a better perception of what your learners have learned from your instruction, and it gives you kind of a critique of how your instruction is being received. So it's a good way to, if you let your learners guide the discussion, you can gain a lot of information from that. And that's primarily one of the main advantages that I think. Learner participation is really important. I dislike it when an instructor applicant ends his lesson plan with, well, do you have any questions about what we talked about? Well, most learners aren't going to have any questions, and so I think that's a poorly worded question to kind of end the lesson with, because most learners that I've experienced don't have very many questions. You have to guide them and gain the information from them as to where the questions are. And if you have a few carefully placed questions about the specifics of what you're trying to teach, then you'll gain some insight as to where they are, and really it's very worthwhile for you to gain those insights so that you can have a better understanding of how well your instruction is received. So then we would talk a little bit about problem-based learning, and those, you create a scenario or a problem, and you and find out where your students at. Scenario-based training is really important when it comes to problem solving learning, problem-based learning. People have to use, as they call the HOTS, their higher order thinking skills, in order to answer and figure out problems that might be out of the ordinary. The scenario I kind of used earlier was, let's say that you're practicing accuracy landings that day, and sometimes you can't plan these kinds of things happening, but just as you're entering the downwind leg, the runway is blocked by another glider that just landed previously to you. And then to compound things, there's another glider in the pattern ahead of you in the pattern. So you don't know what they're going to do as far as where they're going to land on the runway. You don't know how quickly the glider on the runway might be cleared from the runway. And so you can see, and gain some insight as to how your learner thinks about those scenarios and decides what to do. I mean, if they have an extra 100 feet of altitude and they're not aware of any other aircraft in the approach, before they actually get to the pattern, maybe they do a 360 out there to give themselves a little spacing and a little time to allow things to play out, so to speak, ahead of them. So but if they don't, if they're so focused on the fact that I got to do this accuracy landing, and they kind of ignore the other distractions that are around them that they should be um, considering. Well, that's on you as well as them, because that's the way that you've taught them to be so focused. Or if you didn't necessarily teach them that way, you didn't recognize, you the teacher, you the instructor didn't recognize that that's their personality, to be that focused, that they exclude other things around them that they need to not exclude, and create a situational awareness of what's going on to increase their safety of the maneuver that they're trying to perform. And as I said, if your learner recognizes that those problems arising, then that's good on you, the instructor. You've taught them well. You've taught them to look at their situation or evaluate their situational awareness and make a different plan. Perhaps you have a 3 or 4 thousand foot long runway, and the glider that's on the runway is in the last third of the runway. Well, realistically, you've got 2/3 of the runway to land in. Um, and if you don't know where that glider ahead of you is going to land, well, one thing, if you have radios, you communicate on the radio and say, "Hey, Blue ASK 21, what's your plan there? I'm right behind you in the approach. What's your plan about making a safe landing, and where are you planning to roll out?" So now you're better equipped to make a plan that avoids those other people, just because you were situationally aware to understand and foresee that there could be complications. And so problem solving is a real asset, and it's a necessary asset um, that your student or your learner has. So, and the case study method, I use case studies of actually NTSB reports. We use those kinds of case studies at the Soaring Safety Foundation FERCs, where we actually look at accidents that have happened and analyze them, and allow your learner to say, well, I would have done it this way instead of that way. And maybe they would have avoided the accident entirely. So case studies are really, I think, an important tool that you have in your toolbox um, to use, and you can use it as a learning experience. Is there any questions out there that we should discuss before we move on?
We've had no questions show up so far. I did want to remark that you don't want it to say things like when you stall, the wing falls off.
Thank you, Rich.
I think I've heard you mention that before, Ron.
Yeah, I think you have. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Or the nose falls off. Try not to use slang terms like that, because the nose pitches, but it won't fall off. And you might have learners who are a little sensitive to that. And so in a turning stall, like you said, I've heard some instructors refer to it as the wing falls off. Well, I hope not. And so that's a good point. I appreciate you that observation, Rich. So,
Bob, wanted to hear very briefly. One of the tricks I like to use to listen to the candidate after each flight is to ask the candidate, how did we do during the takeoff roll? And listen to what they have to say, what he or she has to say. How did we do during the climb up? How did we do after release? How did we do setting up the approach to land? How did we do during the landing? How did we do getting clear of other traffic on the runway? And you'll find that the candidate will tell you what they view as the truth. Bless them. That's great. It occasionally happens that their grasp of what they did is not the same as your grasp, and then you'll have an opportunity to deliver an effective critique. Over.
a good point, Bob. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. So as we move forward, this is something, electronic learning, e-learning is something that that us who have been in this game for a while, we didn't learn this way. I mean, we didn't use e-learning very much, but today's world, as we get younger and younger pilots involved with soaring, they have grown up in that environment, and so they're much more responsive to that environment. And in some cases, it's a good thing. In other cases, it may not be as good. It's just different, and I think that as an instructor, we have to adapt to those different kinds of learning methods that people have adopted in this world of computers and iPads and other things that we have available to us to learn by. Computer assisted learning, FASafety.gov topics toward wings credits. Our Glenn Collins has created, he's at least doubled or tripled the number of topics that are available in the FA.safety.gov site for glider pilots to use toward wings, topics and things like that to use toward wings. And so, and Glenn continues to work in that area. And if you have any ideas or anything like that, you can get a hold of Rich, and he can get a hold of Glenn, or you can get a hold of Glenn directly if you know him, and talk to him about, hey, how about if we develop a topic like this to be used in the wings program? So Glenn is very receptive to that, and I think that it's benefited all of us to have someone in our corner, so to speak, working there with the wings program and the website. So, and we have webinars and Zoom meetings like this, like we're participating in today. I mean, this even 10 or 15 years ago, these were not as prevalent. I'm not saying they weren't at all, but they weren't as prevalent outside of the business world. And but now, they're becoming more and more, excuse me, accepted and prevalent as we move forward. I know when I was working for United Airlines, there was a period of time where we transitioned from, strictly book learning to and lecture hall type methods of learning to computer assisted training and working with programs and things like that we could then watch and listen and learn. There's advantages, but there's a lack of peer interaction. So that's the advantages of the Zoom meetings, because you can get a group of people together from all parts of the country. It's kind of, like this webinar. We're getting people together from all parts of the country, but the disadvantage. Excuse me. There's the disadvantages that there's a lack of peer intervention. So that's a definite disadvantage. I know that during COVID, when we did a number of FERC flight instructor refresher courses online via Zoom. I know as instructors, we missed that interaction that we had in person, and we're back to in-person classes, and I think they're much more effective. I know I, as an instructor, when I participate occasionally, enjoy it much more, and I know that I think that Rich and Glenn, who are the main drivers in that show, have a lot better satisfaction of the product that they're putting out there when they're in person. So, and preparation for the FAA knowledge exams, that's been you can go online and take practice tests. You can go online and get the information. It's primarily, though, that computer assisted learning is probably a rote method of learning, to be quite honest. Largely, it can be a little bit higher level of learning, but for the most part, I think that computer assisted learning is primarily aimed at rote level of learning. So, and we have simulations, role playing, and video gaming these days. We got the Condor simulators for those of you around the country who have been getting these Condor simulators that the SSA is sponsoring. You know, they're actually putting half the money up to install a Condor simulator in your local club or training operation. And I know that we were an early adopter in our club, and now all three clubs in the Chicago area now have Condor simulators for ground training. You know, it works really good on days when you got 1,000-foot overcast and maybe a little drizzly rain or something like that. You can go out and still do some training and keep people's to some extent keep their proficiency and their interest up. I know one of our members in our club, and I know several members like this around the country, are starting these cross country. His is on Monday nights here locally. We do a little cross country, and there's we've had anywhere from 5 to 8 people show up to those, and we go fly a cross country flight, and it's interesting. It's fun. And the Condor simulator, especially the latest version, has really enhanced that. I think it's a good step forward from the second version. So, and we use scenarios. You know, we again, I've already talked about that, but I use scenarios based largely on the NTSB reports of accidents and incidents. Also, there's an accident and incident reporting on the Soaring Safety website, Soaring Safety Foundation website, and that you can utilize. There's scenarios there, Condor simulator training scenarios that Scott Manley made up and allowed the Soaring Safety Foundation to utilize those. And then, of course, YouTube videos. You know, I know these presentations are converted into YouTube videos thanks to Frank Whiteley. He's been very conscientious in producing those for me, and I think in the long run these will really play out, because now we can say, hey, you know, we've got these YouTube videos that of webinars that we've conducted about that particular topic.
Hey, Ron.
Yes.
So this is about teaching, and one of the things that I think we should all consider is how do we use the Zoom technology to do our ground training during the week rather than spending time while you're at the airport on the weekend when you really want to go fly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, I also, you know, in our club recently, we've decided to adopt the Russell Holtz training that he provides. He's got about 35 hours of courses that he, you know, it costs money. You know, it's like everything else in this world. It costs money to watch them, whereas you can watch YouTube videos for free in general. Or but at any rate, but that's a good point, Rich. You know, when we're not, it does enhance our ability to utilize the time when we're out at the field when we have good weather to fly instead of go over and go through ground lessons that we could have done on a YouTube or other platform like that during the week, when, you know, just in the evening, just an hour in the evening, you get on a Zoom call with a small group of people. Each individual instructor can have their own small group. You know, hey, today we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about weight and balance, or I'm going to talk about steep turns, or I'm going to talk about thermaling, and have the instructor come up with a little presentation and get a Zoom meeting going. You know, Zoom meetings you can get. I think you can anybody can get a Zoom meeting for 40 minutes. And to be quite honest, the attention span of most people isn't much longer than 40 minutes anyway. So if you're careful in organizing your method, your teaching, you can get a fairly good lesson in there in those 40 minutes. Plan it for maybe 20 or 25 minutes with a open discussion then for 10 or 15 minutes. So I think that's a good point, Rich. We can utilize that kind of technology that we have today too.
Ron, Wander here. One other, or a new, at least to me, additional group learning Zoom type method program has been developed by Phil Clowder, a longtime CFI glider in the Philadelphia Glider Club and a friend of mine. And over the winter, he had I think about a 20 or 25 session ground school that people could sign up for. He does charge for it. The PGC charges $40 for it. And I recommended it to a number of people in my local glider club who were either student pilot certificate holders or private pilot certificate holders. And the reviews were very good. So that's Phil Clowder, Klauder, the Philadelphia Glider Club. I know that Phil intends to offer this again in the future, and it was a resource that years ago didn't resist. So a big round of applause to Phil for doing it. And they do charge $40 to take it, which in my opinion means that if you pay $40, you're going to show up and do the work and actually learn something over.
It's a good recommendation, Bob. I agree. I was aware of Phil's and I had kind of forgotten to mention it, but I agree. I think that we had one member in our club attend his course this past winter, and he found it to be very helpful. So, and I'm sure there's others out there. I mean, different areas of the country have different, instructors who want to do those kinds of things and are cognizant of that. And I think that you have to kind of use the resources that you have in your local area, and many local areas have many of their own resources. So this is one of the learning methods that we're going to talk about briefly, a cooperative group learning method. And this is exactly, what we're talking about right now with this Phil Clowder thing, small groups, clear and complete instructions, offers an opportunity for learner success, learner access and comprehension of information, individual accountability, and time after completion of group tasks for learners to systematically reflect upon how the group worked together as a team. So sometimes this works pretty well. A glider assembly would be a good group, cooperative group learning arena, where you get, I know you can have too many people, but you assign, if you have 10 people out there, you assign 5 people to assist directly with the assembly of the glider and 5 people to observe and look at the checklists and things like that are also important. And then when you go to take the glider apart, you reverse roles. You have 5 people who put it together, now observe and have 5 more people actually assist in disassembling the glider. So I mean, it's and you can do that a couple of times, and get the, obviously you want to end up with the glider assembled, but more than likely, but that's a good cooperative group learning methodology example that you could utilize. Demonstration performance method, and this is where the instructor demonstrates and then his students perform. So you have an explanation phase, which is usually on the ground. You want to make sure that you've presented the objectives of the lesson, and tried to explain what you're going to do. If it's a flight maneuver, let's just let's use slow flight. Today we're going to do slow flight. So you want to present what the objective of the lesson is, and it's flying around slowly without 5 knots or 5 miles an hour above stall without stalling the aircraft. And so now you have a clear objective. And so how do we do that? Well, we fly at a different pitch attitude than we did. And pitch attitude is probably one of the most important parts of slow flight. Is if you maintain a good, solid pitch attitude that you know will produce the speed that you're trying to achieve, and you concentrate on that pitch attitude, that'll show you that you how you can be successful at that. So then you have the demonstration phase where the instructor actually shows the learner how to fly a different pitch attitude than maybe the normal cruise pitch attitude, and make a couple of shallow bank turns. We use shallow bank turns, and again, there's a correlation level of learning about that is as you get steeper in the bank, the stall speed increases. So you want to use shallow bank turns in slow flight because you do not want to have the glider stall. So you can kind of correlate the different aspects of what you're trying to teach in that way. Learner performance in an instructor supervised phase. You allow the student to follow along initially on the controls during the demonstration, and then you follow closely by supervising the student's performance. Whether you're most of the time I'm not on the controls, especially in a maneuver like slow flight. I just very carefully and watch very carefully, making sure that they're using a proper amount of rudder for coordination. And airplane pilots I found are notorious for not using enough rudder to accurately coordinate the glider in free flight. So you can I usually rest lightly on the rudder pedals. I usually don't rest on the yoke as well, but you get a little bit of feedback that way. You just tell the student, hey, if you feel something there, that's probably me, and I'm not trying to resist what you're doing. I'm just trying to follow along to see what you're doing. So, and then you have the evaluation phase. The instructor uses a set of criteria to judge the performance, i.e., their common errors if they're a student pilot, or the PTS/ACS has a set of performance criteria that you can judge the maneuver by. Drill and practice method. So I think you have to be I think you have to be a little bit careful about the drill and practice method, and for the reasons that we'll talk about here in the next few minutes. So I think care must be taken using this method without proper evaluation, because if you let's say the repetitive action that you're going to do, the drill and the practice that you're going to do today, is you're going to try to get this person soloed in the pattern, and so you want to make sure that they know how to fly the approach and in landing, how to flare, how to choose their touchdown area, how to fly the approach around that touchdown area, et cetera, how to make sure they do know how to do a checklist. But the caution would be that, so let's say you're successful. Let's say you make 5 approaches and landings, and the last 3 or the last 2 are what you would consider to be okay for solo. And so you decide to solo this person. And so you do, but I think that you have to be very careful and make sure that they understand that this drill and practice method was part of the reason that they were able to perform in that manner for today. Under the given conditions that we have, the wind is maybe less than, maybe calm or very light. The traffic is almost non-existent, if not non-existent. So they don't have other distractions, other decisions that have to be made because of outside distractions. And so, you want to make sure that if you use this drill and practice method, that it comes with a set of conditions that you, the instructor, understand, and you want to make sure that your learner understands as well. These repetitive actions like pattern toes and landings may sharpen the skill, but they detract from the bigger picture of when to make the decision to land and fly the appropriate flight path. I am not a to be quite honest, as an instructor, I'm not a firm believer in doing just pattern tows. Okay. And the reason is because I want to be sure that I'm also training a person to make the proper decisions about when to return to the airfield to make the approach and landing. And you're not learning that when you're just doing a pattern tow. You release from tow, you do a 360-degree turn, and you're inserted into the downwind leg. And so that hasn't shown. You don't have to show any judgment or decision making skills for when you're flying around, when you return to the field and enter in the pattern for the approach and landing. So I think you have to be careful about using this drill and practice method without making sure that the student, your learner, understands what the conditions under which you're doing it, and you yourself understand the conditions under which you're using it. Simulation could be used to sharpen the skill. I mean, in a simulator, you can reset the glider back into the downwind landing with a punch of a button. It puts you at 1,000 feet, and there you are downwind, and you do the approach and landing again. And you haven't practiced the tow, you haven't practiced anything else. You've just practiced the drill of flying a probably a similar approach every time and landing. And so it can be used to sharpen those skills, but I think you have to make sure that your learner and yourself have to realize that they have a very limited utilization. So now we're to the application phase of the, sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. Hang on, let me get back here. I must have hit a button. I'm sorry. Am I still on the website? Rich, do you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. While you recover, Ron, I'll make a remark about so-called pattern tows. This is Bob Wonder. I
Okay.
think it was Tom Knopf, but I'm not certain, who told me 20 years ago, if you simply have the tow plane bring the candidate, launch, make a few turns, and have the glider release at the beginning of essentially the downwind leg so that the candidate doesn't have to make any decision about how to enter the approach. I'm pretty sure it was Tom who told me. He said, if that's all we do, I could teach a monkey to fly. And he's right. And again, I'm not sure it was Tom, but whoever it was who said that to me, I've never forgotten the remark. And that was one of the many reasons that persuaded me to be in complete agreement with you that the idea of just taking a so-called pattern tow to notch another solo is a very, very bad idea. It's not high quality training. The candidate should be brought to an altitude high enough so that all components of planning the approach to land are on the shoulders of the candidate, not on the shoulders of the tow pilot who simply parked the candidate in a position so easy to fly the approach that, as Knopf said, a monkey could do it. Over, and thanks.
Yeah, thanks for emphasizing that as well. I think that's worthwhile to talk about. So we're remember we talked about the different levels of teaching, and we're to the application level of the lesson. So application, you're past the understanding, you're now applying the knowledge that you've taught. You have to understand the lesson or maneuver. You're applying that understanding into action. Excuse me. And in many cases, then you can even get to the ultimate level of learning, and that is correlation. That understanding with other maneuvers of knowledge is the highest level of learning. Understanding the terms and procedures to perform a weight and balance would be, maybe the understanding level or maybe even the rote level. And applying that knowledge to actually do the calculation. And finally, being able to apply that knowledge to do a weight and balance at another aircraft because you understand all the other terms. That would be more or less the correlation level of learning. So, and then the assessment of the lesson is kind of the last step in the teaching process. The review of what has been covered and ask learners to demonstrate how the lesson objectives have been covered. And again, Bob has emphasized this. I have emphasized it numerous times. If you ask the learner to demonstrate how the lesson objectives have been covered, you can gain a lot of insight as to whether you've actually created a lesson that is teaching them the things that you want them to know. And the results should be recorded so the learner's progress can be recognized. Keeping track of, I think, the learner's progress is an important step in the teaching process, and it's an important step for many reasons. One is that it gives the student a sense of the learner a sense of accomplishment. It gives you, the instructor, a good idea of where that learner is in their training. And if you are not available the next weekend and yet that learner wants to come out and fly, you now have a piece of paper that usually we keep ours at the field rather than the logbook. The person takes their logbook, but we keep those pieces of paper that record the progress at the field. So now if another instructor wants to, or that student, that learner has got another instructor engaged to teach them the next weekend when you're not available, he or she can now look at that progress report, that recorded progress report, and gain much information about where the learner is at and where you need to go next with your teaching. So we've got instructional aids. Instructional aids, they support lesson objectives. They're usually learner-centered. They usually build on previous learning, contain useful and meaningful content that is consistent with the principles of learning. I think instructional aids are good. No, I know they are. They are good. I know many instructors, like in our club, we have a model of a glider, and I don't have it with me, but we have a model of a glider and we have a model of a tow plane, and you can actually utilize those instructional aids greatly, or use just a whiteboard. We have a whiteboard in our instructional room as well as the simulator in there. So, try to make sure that the instructional aids are meaningful to not only you but to your learner as well. I mean, if they're not receptive to those things, and in today's world, I mean, our son I know is a high school teacher, and they've got some kind of whiteboard that's actually a computer board that records whatever they're putting on. If he's writing on the board or whatever, it records all that information, and then he can take that recording basically and put it out there on the internet for his students, his learners to review later on. And so it's I know we don't have that available in our club. Maybe some clubs might have that advanced of learning aid, but I know those kinds of things are coming. So, we have a marker board. We have supplemental printed material. You have maybe the like for instance the instruction manual in I know Schweitzer 233 leaves a little bit to be desired about assembly or disassembly of the sailplane, and so I know many clubs have come up with their own supplemental printed material about glider assembly and disassembly. So, those kinds of things exist, and you should utilize them as long as they're accurate and in compliance with what the POH or the glider flight manual has to say. The enhanced training materials, like I just mentioned, the whiteboard that my son teaches high school classes off of. Projected material, that's a little bit of we don't use that as much as maybe we did at one time, movies and things like that. We use more videos, online videos and things like that these days. So computer assisted learning, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about models and mock-ups and cutaways. I know some glider schools, some schools have cutaways of instruments, the inside of an instrument. They take an old instrument that's, a variometer or something like that that's no longer suitable for use, and so they can cut the casing away a little bit, and the student can look inside then and see what it looks like actually inside of a variometer. So we have test preparation material. These are usually specifically aimed at the knowledge test that's required, whether it's the pre-solo written knowledge exam or whether it's a knowledge exam for the private or the commercial pilot certificate or flight instructor certificate. They're commercially available. They're written. They can be in videos as well. They're usually just rote learning, though. I mean, you're not really learning, in my opinion, the subject matter in much depth. You're just doing some rote learning. I've talked about the glider pilot ground schools that you can attend. The next one will be in June if you want to go on his website and see that. Lime has test prep materials. AOPA, I just learned when I was researching this for this slide that they have a free test preparation website that's free to the AOPA members. So Shepherd Air is another option. Dauntless Aviation. I know that Ken Sorensen used Dauntless in his preparation for his knowledge test. And I know that Sporty's Pilot Shop also has some knowledge exam material that you can utilize to prepare for the knowledge exam. But there again, that's just rote. That's not. It'll get you through the knowledge test. Let's just put it that way. And it has very limited, and that's unfortunately that seems to be the way of the current learner. And I'm not saying I'm much different, to be quite honest, but people just want to get through the knowledge exam because that's a hurdle that they perceive that they have to get through, and so whatever way they can get through it with the knowledge that they need to accomplish that. So, and future developments, we got all kinds of electronic communications on the horizon. Voice recognition technology. You don't have to know how to type anymore. You can talk into a microphone and the words will magically appear on the screen. Computer-aided information, simulator devices, virtual reality. Some people really like virtual reality, and some people don't like it as well. But it's there, and it's something that you might utilize if that's something that people want. And I think that as we move forward, the younger people coming up are going to be more in tune to things like virtual reality. So, and instructors with well-developed computer skills are in great demand because that's the wave of the future. So as a chapter summary, I'm just going to read this, and we'll, if we have any discussion, we can talk about it. As indicated by this discussion, the teaching process organizes the material an instructor wishes to teach in such a way that the learner understands what is being taught. An effective instructor uses a combination of teaching methods as well as instructional aids to achieve this goal. By being well prepared, an effective instructor presents and applies lesson material and also periodically assesses learning. An effective instructor never stops learning him or herself. He or she maintains currency in subject matter being taught, as well as how to teach it by reading the professional journals and other aviation publications, many of which can be viewed and purchased via the internet and another source of valuable aviation information for professional instructors. And that's who we are. I want to emphasize that as an instructor, you are a professional, and should consider yourself a professional because that's what you are. You should not approach it from a haphazard way. You should approach it as a professional in an organized and knowledgeable way. These are just some of our sources that we've put on the screen before. This is some of our resources and references. Bob Wander, Russell Holtz, Tom Knopf, Scott Manley, Dave Seymour runs the glider pilot CFI and knowledge test preparation course. So we've got his Dave Seymour. His next one is June 10th and 11th, and that's primarily for the knowledge test. Our last session will be next week, April 30th, and we'll talk about Chapter 1, Risk Management and Single Pilot Management, and we'll incorporate ideas not only from Chapter 1 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, but subject matter that's also found in the Risk Management Handbook, which is the -2 version of the series of handbooks that the FAA has available for us to utilize. Questions? That pretty much concludes my presentation. You wanted to talk about something at the end here, Bob. If you want to go ahead and discuss that topic, let's go ahead and discuss that now, unless we have other questions.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but one thing that has come up from people who have emailed me to my personal email address was, could we possibly have a follow-up session where it's basically Q&A rather than lecture and presentation? And I don't have an answer. That's up for you and Ron and the rest of the people to decide, but there might be some real value in that. Over.
Yeah, I think we could consider that. I mean, I think we could consider that within some bounds. Yeah. I don't want people to, get off in left field, obviously, with that. And so, but yes, I think that we could consider that. And I think what you were wanting us to discuss, Bert, have Bert Compton and I to discuss, was the common errors that we see on practical exams, practical flight instructor initial exams. That's what the topic that I thought that you wanted to maybe delve into a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to present on it tonight, but I think it would be very helpful as a wrap up next week, or if we add a session in the following week, so that candidates know, based on the failures of people who've gone before them, this is not your commercial glider flight test. This is a teaching test. That's what you have to be prepared for. And that's what all of your presentations, Ron, have been all about. Over.
Yeah, I'm just looking at let me look at my schedule here. Maybe we could continue past the 30th, one more week there in May. Let me see what I have, if anything. Right now, I don't have anything on Wednesday, the 7th, which would be the following week after the April 30th meeting that will talks about Chapter 1, the risk management and the risk management handbook as well. So, yeah, I'll see if I'll get together with Bert and we'll see if we can put together something that we think would be worthwhile, and so that we don't drag this stuff on too long in one session. So
I'd be happy to interview several other DPEs around the country and get brief summaries from them as well as about common failures on the test. Over.
Okay. Well, if you want to do that for us, Bert, or Bob, that'd be great.
Done.
And I know, Bert, are you available on the 7th, Bert?
7th of May?
Yeah.
No, I'll be out of the country, and I'll miss the April 30th. Sorry to say. I do have a list of priorities that I talked about. What the weak points of an initial CFI. If you want to delay this to another time, but on the oral portion and then on the flight portion of their check ride and the misunderstandings we see a lot.
Well, if you want to take,
Bert, if you're willing to forward those remarks to me, I'll be happy to present on your behalf while you're overseas. Over.
Yeah, can you read it?
No, you can email them. You got my address. So.
All right, I'm getting ready to. Right now, I'm hosting a event here at Marfa, a soaring event, but let me get on it. If I had to pick one for the oral session, it'd be the scenarios. And I preface everything as this is going to be commercial candidate, you're preparing. Mr. Instructor, you're preparing initial CFI. And what I lead off on every oral question practically is, how will you teach? What are your references? Where's your lesson plans? Where's your scenarios? There seem to be weak on understanding that lesson plans and scenarios have to be very important. I have a list of about 30 lesson plans I've accumulated through the years. And on the flying portion, many of our initial CFIs and gliders come from the airplane world, and they tend to apply airplane techniques, such, for instance, the pattern planning and how large a pattern they might fly. And so that's misunderstandings about pre-solo written tests. They're supposed to have one for each type of glider. That's a reg, and I see that pretty weak. Okay, I'll let you. I'll try to type that mess out.
Just send me the scanned paper that you've got. Take a photograph with your iPhone, send it along. That'll do. Over.
I don't think you can read it, but I'll be happy.
I think that's a worthwhile, could be a very worthwhile session for these instructors who are looking to take their exam soon, and maybe this summer or this fall. And I think that could be a worthwhile discussion. And so
Well,
go ahead.
I'm speaking to the instructors that are preparing the initial CFI. The add-on CFI is a different animal. Usually our problem is that applying airplane techniques to landing pattern, for instance. But the instructors out there who are helping us add another flight instructor initially, they really need to know where these weak points are in teaching.
Yeah.
To know stuff, experienced racing pilots think they can teach, exception being Ken Sorensen, because I know he realized it's like teaching someone to drive a stick shift car. Oh yeah, you did this. No. You've got to really think about how you're going to present it within economy of words and have a lesson plan that helps you be organized. So I'm speaking to the instructors that are training and recommending initial CFIs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, there was an airplane initial instructor yesterday, and he was not successful, and it was because in today's world, my experience, especially in the airplane, which is the majority of my experience, I do also give glider flight instructor exams and other exams in the glider, but it seems like they show up with downloaded lesson plans off the internet. Many of times they haven't even looked at the lesson plan. They've got them. They've got a stack of lesson plans that they downloaded off the internet, and I can tell when they start. I'll assign them a task to teach me, and they just start down that lesson plan. And it's interesting because obviously Bert and I and other mostly examiners, we have a pretty good background and knowledge about the subject matter that they're trying to teach, and they skip over things that they don't know. So they're starting down this predetermined lesson plan that they downloaded off the internet that they have never looked at it before the test began. And they don't have any references. They don't have any knowledge about where to find the information if they don't know about the information that's on that lesson plan. And if they come up on a topic during the presentation of the lesson plan that they know about, they just skip it and they move on. So as well as I do, Bert, when people do that, guess what probing questions we ask at the conclusion of their lesson plan presentation? Well, we're going to ask those questions that they skipped, those things that they know or should know and be able to teach. I mean, this kid the other day, he talked about having proper coordination. Coordination is very important and it has to be proper. I said, okay, what is proper coordination? Well, coordination between the ailerons and the rudders. Well, what is it? Explain it to me. What is proper coordination? How would you explain to a student what proper coordination is? Well, you don't want to have the glider yaw. Well, why would the glider be yawing? Well, and what kind of yaw is that? Well, it's I don't know. The glider yaws. The airplane will yaw when you try to bank it, or when you and they don't only use the term bank. They use the term turn. When you try to turn the airplane, the airplane will yaw. Okay, so what's causing that yaw? Well, the wing, the high wing goes up, and that causes yaw. I mean, that was his level of understanding about trying to teach how to make a simple turn. I mean, literally, that was his example of trying to teach a simple turn. And I just, it's no wonder he was not successful. Obviously, unfortunately for him. I mean, I think he can be successful in the future, but he needs to be able to put into words the things and you need to read the book. I mean, the book tells you exactly, what it is. In order to bank the glider or bank the aircraft, you have to use the ailerons, and when you use the ailerons, that creates adverse yaw. He didn't even know the term adverse yaw. I mean, he did not ever use the term adverse yaw. And I in my debriefing, I actually told him about the 5 side effects of turning flight that was reviewed to us in Joy Soaring. The adverse yaw, the diving tendency, the yaw against the direction of turn, the overbanking tendency, and the increase in stall speed. I mean, we all, at least I learned it. I'm sure you did too, Bert. I'm sure that Bob Wander learned it years ago. Rich Carlson, I know he learned it because I taught it to him. And so we all learned those kinds of things through the years, and that kind of stuff, that kind of basic stuff, just isn't getting taught these days, which is appalling to me. So that's my 2 cents.
I think my connection might be a little unstable, but again, I'm talking.
Yeah, you're not coming through real well. You're kind of coming through clipped, Bert.
Because when you go back candidate fail. I hope you can hear me.
Well, they do, but
The
by the
point
time
was
I
right.
get them debriefing them, they know.
Yeah. Let me. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Bob, and we'll try to do that on the 7th. I'll talk to Frank about setting it up for us on the 7th, and we'll try to get the word out via the SSA website and things like that, and we'll try to talk about that on the 7th. I'll put it on my schedule to talk about that on the 7th. So next week we'll see. I guess you won't see Bert, but we'll see the rest of you, and we'll have Ken back. I think he said he might be back on the 30th as well. So we'll finish this portion of it up next week, and then try to meet on the 7th and talk about some of the common things that we see during the exams. And Bob, you're going to collect from other examiners around the country some of those things as well, right?
Affirmative. Over.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your attention. We've overstayed our welcome again tonight, and I appreciate your attention. And we'll get this thing finished up next week, and then work on the 7th about some of those common errors that us examiners see during check rides.
Good.